The new forecast for June 2023, we should say, is above previous forecasts at 672,000, but clearly that is below the record high that we have just reached. The important thing to say, given that Brexit was supposed to have given us control of our borders, is that it's nearly 3 times the pre-Brexit average of 200 to 250,000 a year. Let's speak to Mike Jones, who is Executive Director at Migration Watch. It's a British think tank which argues for lower immigration in the UK. And the first thing we should say, of course, Mike, when we talk about those pre-Brexit figures, there's an awful lot of stuff that's happened since then.
Indeed. I mean, public opinion is strongly in favour of stricter immigration controls, and there's a widespread belief that that this is the government's objective too. There's this sort of common belief that if there's a spike in immigration, it's due to government lapses, possibly involving illegal entry or exploitation of the asylum system. But in reality, the spike in immigration results from a deliberate policy, not its failure. So, the revised net migration figures for 2022 have leaped from 606,000 to a staggering, 745,000. And this reveals a betrayal of the government's policy to take back control and cut immigration numbers to the tens of thousands. And the figures for this year ending June 2023 has hit 672,000. So this is a result of deliberate government policy, not a failure of policy.
Well, quite, because the focus is on stop the boats and those coming over the channel. But I think it was around 40-odd thousand that came over in this particular year. So if you'll pardon the pun, that's a drop in the ocean when you compare it to 745,000 that came legally. What sort of levers does the government have at its disposal to stop this happening?
Well, look at the increases in net migration. Obviously, there's an issue with illegal migration, and that pertains to the legal architecture that exists in the UK. But work visas have increased to 585,000. That's a 54% increase. Student visas are close to 650,000. That's an increase of 8%. Family visas, 82,000. That's an increase of over 100%. So, when the government says it can't control this, or it's outside of its ambit of policy, they're lying. These are within its sphere of control, and they've chosen to keep the pedal to the metal on mass legal migration.
OK, Geeta Harriet, you were in government at the time, and I know Boris Johnson certainly wanted to get net migration down. Why is it so high? What did he do to bring it down?
People always start from the idea that they want it to be lower, and yet when you look at specific applications, they come to different conclusions. So what happens when the Ukrainians flee war? Everybody's very supportive to allowing as many as possible into this country. When people are abandoning Hong Kong, we feel an obligation. Everybody's in support of that. In general, an awful lot of people are happy to see it as a sign of the success of UK universities that they can attract in a highly competitive market some of the best talent from all over the world. But when you add that up, it's going to come to a great big figure. So we need a more intelligent debate, I think, about migration here. It's always hysterical. It's always focused on numbers. Some of those numbers, when they go up, it's a sign of success. We need the health workers, we need the social care workers, we need the students, and we have offered others.
Part of the problem, Geeta, is that David Cameron said we'll get it to the tens of thousands. Some have talked about a cap. I think the former Home Secretary talked about a cap. If you box yourselves into a corner like that, then don't be surprised when the public say, well, you've not delivered.
Yeah, and I think that was a mistake. And now there's a challenge for the government that not only does it look like a sort of a betrayal, but it looks like incompetence. If you have set yourself the goal of cutting the numbers, whether it's a good idea or not, you are judged on that, and on that basis you are judged really poorly at the moment. So there's two things you can do. You can find a way of cutting the numbers down very, very harshly and rapidly, or you need to level, and this is what Rishi Sunak says he wants to be. He wants to do things differently. He wants to level with the British public. He wants to tell us what is good for our long-term interest, and a lot of these numbers reflect things that are good for us alongside things that are not.
Yeah, I mean, talking about things that are good for us, Justin, we've got 1 million unfilled jobs. And so a lot of people will say, well, why don't we just invite more people in to fill them?
Well, and you're certainly right. I mean, a lot of the people coming in are taking the jobs that people didn't want to do, with an ageing population creating this vacancy, particularly in health and care. And we want a better NHS, we want a better care system. Well, those workers had to come from somewhere, and it didn't look like British people were filling those jobs. And again, the student issue, it's because we offer great degree courses. They're shorter than courses in the US, they're cheaper than courses in the US, which helps. They're culturally more prestigious. So of course people want to come. It is a sign of success. But it does mean, I think, if you ignore the net figure, but the total inflow of people, what you're actually saying is 1 in 50 people on the street wasn't here a year ago. That's a lot of change, and people are very scared of that. And I think they associate that as well with the boats, the very obvious issue, the very contentious issue that people are coming in without having gone through a due process, which is not the case for workers. It's not the case for students. So it's that fear of change, of course, and people will capitalise on that.
Mike, in terms of the economy, there are some who say, when you're in an economic lull, which we are, the more people you have, the greater the supply side of the economy. That's one argument. The other one, which Jacob Rees-Mogg was venturing today, the Conservative MP, is that actually we've invited people in who are lower skilled, lower paid, and that is depressing wages. What would you say to both of those arguments?
Well, firstly, I think the panelists are completely wrong on this. I mean, in terms of pensions, the argument is debunked by the aging process. Immigrants grow old, and their arrival does not offer a sustainable solution to the dependency ratio, the current ratio between working aged and retired people. A sustainable solution for this depends on non-demographic means. In terms of productivity has flatlined. I mean, the OBR are actually forecasting a slight percentage decrease in productivity this year, minus 0.3%, I believe. So, I mean, these are economic fallacies. I mean, ultimately, a larger population will increase GDP, increases the size of the economy because you have more people. But ultimately, wealth is dependent on GDP per person, per capita. Singapore is a richer country than India, even though India has a higher population, because GDP per capita is higher in Singapore. Ultimately, it's about productivity, and what mass immigration does, it increases dependency on certain inflows in the economy, which disincentivizes businesses from investing in human capital, from training the domestic workforce, or from reorientating their business model to more sort of capital-intensive methods.
I mean, that is, Gita, the government's policy, isn't it? Is to focus on the British worker and to upskill and increase productivity among British workers.
Yeah, but that takes time. You can't, train an engineer overnight. And I remember when Boris Johnson was lobbying very hard for Crossrail to go ahead. It's now the Elizabeth line. People ride on it every day through central London. There were not enough engineers in the UK, homegrown, to build that. There weren't enough engineers homegrown in the UK to build HS2. There might be enough to finish what's left of it. There aren't enough doctors and nurses and everybody else to sustain the NHS at the moment. And you can't just say to somebody who's walking down the street in Merthyr Tydfil or wherever, you're going to be a doctor tomorrow. It doesn't happen like that. You can go abroad and find somebody who's qualified and bring them in. And one of the things that the government would say to you is there's been a change in the nature of the people who come here. Before it was a free-for-all as long as you happen to come from within the European Union. Now it is a choice for the government. It's why the numbers are on them, but they would say, some of them, that they have chosen to bring in people whose skills we need, whether they're very, very high-end or because they are prepared to do jobs that for some reason people in the UK, homegrown people, just won't do, and we need those people as care workers, etc.
Really quickly, Mike, because I've got to move on. Go on, Mike, very quickly.
Gitsor is completely wrong. He's committing what the economists call the lump of labour fallacy. If you import 1 million people to fill allegedly 1 million vacancies, guess what happens? You create 1 million vacancies once again, because immigrants aren't just producers of goods and services, they're consumers. as well. And you need a similar amount of people to meet that demand. So it's complete and utter nonsense, and the statistics completely contradict what Guitar is saying.
I'm going to call time on that. We'll agree to disagree. We'll agree to disagree. Thank you very much, Mike, for that.